Welcome back to Tech Yes City, guys. And today we're going to be talking about just my problems and openly what's been happening in the last few months, actually, and also since the start of April. And first of all, we'll address the hair. What's going on there? It's actually there's nothing really to that except in Japan when I first started working in Japan from 2007, I was fine. There was no real gray hairs. And then after I started working at another job in 2010, I started just getting gray hairs. It was such a weird thing. And it was only happening on the sides of my head, not on the top of my head. And so over the years, the hair started getting sporadically and for some odd reason, just only on the sides of my head, gray. And I thought ultimately looking back now, I thought it had to do with just that area or something in my routine where I was living in this city called Torgane in Japan. And I don't know what it exactly is, but the oddest thing is when my friend who I handed my job over to in 2016, when I came back to Australia, he started working at the same job and then started experiencing the exact same thing as me, gray hairs on the side of his head. So to this date, there's something about living in Japan, living in Torgane, and working this job that makes the sides, and only the sides of your head, go gray and not the top. So this hairstyle, I just thought I'd give it a try, where I used to get teased about it in exactly this fashion. So I was like, well, if I'm getting teased about it, then I might as well do it. The hair is not the reason for the slow uploads lately. There's actually two big problems that we're going to talk about, and one of them actually affects tech directly. It's pretty in-depth. But let's get on with that after a quick sponsor spot. If you want to get rid of this annoying Activate Windows message, then today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered for as little as $12 US. After you enter that coupon code BFTYC, you can cop yourself a legit single-end user license today. Links in description below. From the start of this month, I heard some news where one of my sister's friends, they got to travel overseas, and the reason they got to travel was to see their dog. And when I heard this, I was happy for them, but for me personally, I was actually kind of hit me really hard because I've been applying in the last few months to travel to Japan to see my son, and I really want to see him. I really miss him. And I mean, it's one thing to have Skype conversations every day, but it's a completely different thing to see your own son. And so it's kind of been tough on me in that I really miss him during this whole pandemic period. And I've been applying and applying, and I just keep getting rejected. I mean, for me personally, it's hit me hard because there's nothing more important in this world than my family. So that's been weighing on me. But I mean, the solution there, I'm still researching if there's anything else I can do. And I'm going to be trying again and again. I'm just going to keep trying. But besides that, there's also been another thing that's been brewing behind the scenes. And this affects everyone worldwide, especially if you're lower middle class income earners. And that is the inflation and the levels of inflation that the governments are telling us worldwide and what we're actually seeing. And first of all, it started with tech. And I mean, back in September, I realized that, okay, maybe this is just what they're saying. There's going to be some bumps in the economy. And when we saw GPU prices spike, I thought that was just related to simply way more demand outstripping supply on graphics cards. But as the months go on, I'm starting to see prices of everything in general start to rise. And it comes from, say, for instance, you go down the supermarket, mince has now gone from $10 to $12. And then there's other things like my favorite loaf of bread has gone up 10%. And so you're starting to see, in general, inflation isn't low. It's starting to go up across the board. And so coming from a financial background, especially at university, I thought I had the education to deal with that. It was funny because when I went to university, we didn't really learn about Milton Friedman. And I started looking for answers and I was like, okay, what is going to happen in the future going forward? And really what's happened in the past. And I didn't really get the answers until I saw one of these brilliant videos that was uploaded about money creation and inflation. And so in this video, it just basically gave me the answers to all the questions I had over the last few months. And it's funny because the only thing we learned about in university was that Milton Friedman was a herald of the stock market, where I'm pretty sure the only literature I remember researching on him is that CEOs should do everything in the best interest of shareholders. And we never really learned about so many of the other brilliant things. And so over the past few months, I've had to educate myself outside of what I learned at university, because I feel what I learned at university wasn't sufficient enough to explain all the questions that I had on my mind. And then I stumbled upon videos, believe it or not, from the 1970s from Milton Friedman. And these were starting to give me so many more answers, and they're starting to make more sense than anything made before. And so what we're seeing is at the moment a worldwide phenomena of money creation, and it's created from the central banks of those particular countries. So in America, you guys have the Federal Reserve. In Australia, we have the Reserve Bank of Australia. And essentially, it works in different ways. If the particular bank is doing what's called modern monetary theory, then they're going to be purchasing bonds directly from the government. In Australia, they purchase them through the secondary market, but in the grand scheme of things, it's still the same thing. Money is being created, and it's being created at an alarming rate. And now, all things equal, when you create more money and you have the same amount of goods, it's naturally just going to increase the prices of things because there's more money flowing around. And though another thing I had to research was the price of certain goods. So if I go down to the supermarket, there might be a basket of goods that haven't increased in price. And I started researching more into this and why that was. And what I found was they were using cheaper ingredients, economies of scale, and so that made the price stay the same. But if it's cheaper to manufacture something, then technically that is inflation too. But now tying all this back and what is happening, the governments generally after 1990, they wanted to aim for 2 to 3% inflation. They thought this was a good level and it helps the prices remain relatively stable, because what you have is when you have prices go too low for too long, it does create unemployment. When you have prices go too high for too long, that also creates unemployment. And the goals of central banks, or at least what they tell us, is that they want to keep unemployment as low as possible. And so for me personally, I'm having a very hard time believing this when everything around me is increasing at prices that I've never seen before. Take, for instance, house prices, stock prices, and now even prices of PC parts. If we look at a 1660 Super now, which isn't such a desirable card, that is now costing 600 Aussie dollars. If we look back in 2019, this card, I believe you could be had for around $350. So when we look at the cost of that, that has increased nearly double. And this is one thing that's not reflected in the CPI. So now it comes down to what the central bank's telling us and what we should believe. And I'm actually having a very hard time in the last few months, especially believing what the central banks are telling us in terms of our inflation seems to remain low, or it's only going to be transitory. Well, if that's the case, then interest rates should also be spiking transitorily high as well, but they're not. They're remaining low. The cost of borrowing is only 0.1%. In other words, if you're borrowing, then you're winning. And the more you borrow, the more you win in this environment. However, me personally, I'm more of a person who saves money. And I've always throughout my life saved money and worked towards things. And if I couldn't afford it, I didn't buy it. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there who are very similar in their nature. So basically they're admitting that prices will be higher, but they're not doing anything about it. In other words, they're not doing their job properly. And it's actually quite a scary thing to think about, especially if you're like me and you save money. Because if inflation does hit really high levels and you're saving money, then the value of those savings erode very quickly in an inflationary environment. In a deflationary environment, you actually do well, but there's really been no evidence of a deflationary environment. People like to refer back to Japan and say, oh, well, Japan had deflation. I lived over in Japan and I lived there for 9 years roughly, and I really didn't see increases in prices, but also at the same time, I didn't see a decrease in prices either. Things remained relatively the same. And people were like, well, the governments over there did do quantitative easing. And I tried to get my head around this and I was like, well, yes, the governments did increase money supply in Japan. However, what I did find out is that there was actually inflation in Japan. It just didn't come in the way you expected it. And actually, if we look at Japan, especially since the 1990s, they've been a culture of just saving money. And so there actually was inflation, but it was inflation in the personal savings accounts of most Japanese citizens. However, when we contrast that to the UK, the USA, and also Australia, 3 countries that I've seen firsthand, I can see that the spending habits are very different in these countries than they are in Japan. And so when you've got a spending-driven country and you're creating more money, that's naturally going to lead to higher prices. And that's what we're going to see, I believe now, going forward with PC prices across the board. And so a lot of other tech channels, I think, are oblivious to what's going to happen. We all think this is just a transitory thing, but I actually don't think it is a transitory thing. And I think going forward, it's going to be awkward to make content when suddenly the prices of things go up and you're sitting here talking about, oh, well, the price was this 2 years ago and now it's this. What's going on? When in reality, it's just a completely normal thing in that the value of your dollar has just devalued that much. that the prices of those PC parts are now higher. Anyhow, guys, going forward, people will say, well, the crypto miners are the fault for the GPU rising prices. I actually don't believe it's the crypto miners now in essence. I just believe it's the central banks. Without this printed money, we would have never have had the crypto miners to begin with, and prices would be absolutely fine. The crypto miners and the crypto itself is just a symptom of central banks and money creation. That is my feeling on that now that I've actually researched it in depth and educated myself a lot more on the topic. And so going forward, I would highly recommend, if you're like me, converting some of that cash into real assets. However, just like last year, I did know one thing, and that was it was going to be a very rocky road, and the roller coaster is going to have its ups and its downs. But one thing to take away from the video is the outlook of price increases from money creation. And that is when you start creating such a large amount of money, it takes about 6 months for that money to start flowing through. Then after about 2 years, that's when you start seeing the prices increase a lot. And so in the next year, if we do start seeing prices rise and they rise very quickly, then that's when you'll know that it's too late. Anyway, guys, it's always good to have a plan, just like my plan here to ask you guys to hit that like button for us, and I'll be back in full force. But I will say, just like this question of the day here, things are going to be a bit weird when it comes to making, especially price performance tech videos, where the price is just going to be, I feel, anything but normal. Now let's read this question here from Mohammed. They ask, bruh, a 1650 for me is 700 USD. How are you getting them for 150? And I think the question needs to be refrained to how was I getting them for 150? That's no longer a thing. I'm not getting 1650 supers now for 150. They're all out of stock, and the 1660 super is now in my country selling at brand new prices of 600 Aussie dollars. So don't worry, Mohammed, you're not the only one that's seeing all these high prices for GPUs right now. But to answer that question directly, I'm not getting them for 150 anymore. Anyhow, guys, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. If you've stayed this far and you're enjoying that tech, yes, content, then be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.